Welcome. I'm Debbie Rosas, and this is Get In. It's a podcast about conversation. It's dedicated to inspiring change in bodies and lives through what? Through education. Some of it's ancient and some of it's really new. Everything to motivate people to consider alternative ways of living, thinking, eating, communicating, being themselves authentically. I'm the founder of NIA, an international body and life movement art practice that has been inspiring people since 1983 to sense life. We think, but we get out of there as fast as we can. My guest today is Dr. Lissa Rankin. Now, I have the pleasure of having interviewed Lissa several times. She is an author of many, many books. And I was just saying to her, you know what? Your mind is nothing to be contained. The way she plays in the field of consciousness and change and transformation, evolution for herself and humanity, it is brilliant. Our topic today is life and healing. Who doesn't want it, right? But it's specifically about the trauma symptom. Okay, hear me. The trauma symptom of conflict avoidance. Maybe that hits home. Maybe you can reflect on moments in your life when you've avoided things. I certainly have. Since we've talked about this last night, my dreams were crazy off the map. The trauma symptom of conflict is something that many, and I'm going to say, if not all human beings experience. I was watching some children the other day, and I was watching the little girl and the little boy, and I went, there it is, avoidance of conflict. And I was like, oh my gosh, is it a primal instinct? Where does it come from? We're going to talk about it. But I think that it's rooted in a belief. I certainly got that belief. And the belief was that if I avoid conflict, I can protect myself from hurt and I can protect myself from hurting other people. Well, having lived a life, I'm 73 now, I could tell you, not always the truth. Most often, not the truth. Now, living life in a body, right? You've probably experienced some kind of conflict in your life, driving a car, at the grocery store, pushing your car to something, somewhere, everywhere, every culture, the difference of feelings, difference of opinion, difference of thought, it's going to create some sort of conflict. So, how can we learn to communicate through that conflict is what I want to get into. I see, I hear, I sense, I feel things so differently from you. Does that have to create conflict? No, maybe not. Now, I have studied Aikido. It's my favorite martial arts. And I've worked with a beautiful book called The Magic of Conflict by Thomas Crumb. And he's an expert in the martial art of Aikido. And from working with his concept, I've learned firsthand the negative effects, literally the negative effects, I mean, getting knocked down, that come from avoiding conflict, conflict in life and conflict on the training mat. Now, his message in that book, it beautifully mirrors a lot of the philosophy of Aikido, which I am so aligned with, and tools to turn every opportunity of conflict into something that feels like a success. Do no harm for yourself or for the other. That is subjective. And ways to turn stress and conflict into what is called harmony. Now, we know the sense of harmony in our gut feels like peach juice versus acid. When we feel harmonious, we're not gritting our teeth or holding our energy back, but we're engaged. We're engaged in life. Whatever comes to us in life, maybe there's a way that we cannot resist but we can learn to soften and lean into. I invite you to get comfortable now and prepare to hear deep truths. These are scientific truths that I know they're going to make you feel. Now, remember, how do we heal? You've got to feel. We're going to get into it. Lissa Rankin is a doctor of the best kind. She's a doctor of body and life extraordinaire, a mind body medicine physician who walks her talk, shares her wisdom through books, through writing, through workshops, teaching you how to write so many ways to engage with her wisdom. She's an author of 7 books. I couldn't believe it. 7. I don't know if I have them all, but I'm going to make sure I do. Founder of Whole Health Medicine Institute and the nonprofit Heal at Last. She's also an artist, a beautiful artist who researches radical remission, trauma informed medicine, and spiritual healing. I personally think that all healing is a spiritual experience. She teaches, as I said, memoir writing for therapeutic purposes. Having written some memoir about myself, I can tell you it's a way to dig deep. In addition to being an educator of internal family systems, IFS, maybe you know about it, we're going to hear about it. In her own words, she says, I wasn't always an artist. I taught myself how to paint, and I discovered a part of me, right? A part of me. Isn't that what life's about? Just discovering new parts. Education, knowledge is such a great way to discover new parts. Her TED Talks have been viewed over 6 million times, and she starred in 2 national public television specials. I am so honored to have her here with us. She's currently co writing a very interesting book. Her 8th book is called You Turn. This is capital Y, capital O, capital U, U Turn, with her partner, Dr. Jeffrey Rediger. It's about the link between narcissistic abuse, maybe you know it, and mental illness. And it focuses on healthy boundaries and internal family systems therapy and how it can help reverse disease related to nervous system, right? Dysregulation caused by relational trauma. And you know, I've talked about it. You got to learn how to manage your nervous system. But the nervous system, what is it? It's an intelligence, it's a message. It's constantly trying to get your attention. She lives in that beautiful, beautiful place that I came from, Marin County, California, with her partner, Jeff, her daughter, Mira, and her housemate, April. I love the Bay Area. I just said I miss it every single day. And she'll soon be that empty nester, maybe like many of you, as she embarks upon her college journey. So one door closes and another opens. Welcome, Lissa. I am so thrilled to have you here. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm delighted to be here. And hello, everyone who's listening.
Yay. So, my first question is, how do you, since you're so interested in it, how do you describe the trauma symptom of conflict avoidance? What are we talking about here?
Well, I'm really talking about it's in a way, it's a kind of intimacy avoidance, right? Because it's a way to try to keep the peace, to be people pleasing, maybe to be accommodating or fawning. Usually because conflict in the past was not safe in some way. When we're young, if we are raised in sort of securely attached homes with parents who are good enough parents who it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to screw up, like we can have healthy rupture and healthy repair in connection and disconnection, then we learn that it's okay to confront someone, for example, to speak up if we are distressed or upset by something. If somebody does something that hurts us, then we feel safe enough to say, ouch, that didn't feel good. I didn't like it when you did that. But a lot of us grew up in given messages, not just in the home, but culturally and societally, especially for women. Boys and men typically get less of that conflict avoidant messaging. It's more acceptable to fight if you're male, but especially for women, we're supposed to be docile, servile, submissive, quiet, harmonious, smiling, happy people. So that messaging isn't just in the home. We get it in school. We get it in other situations growing up. Um, but in healthy relationships and healthy engagements with the world, then we don't have to have these strategies for avoiding conflict, which tend to create more conflict. And we'll get into what I mean by that. But I'll give you an example. This just happened to me in the past 12 hours.
Okay.
Um, I was throwing a dinner party last night for a new old friend, somebody I knew 15 years ago, who I'm just re-engaging with. So we're just getting to know each other again. And she had me over to her house and had a dinner, and then I invited her over to my house and had a dinner. And I haven't had the chance to cook for you, Debbie, but one of my just core loves of life is I have been a chef since I was 12. I was responsible for
Wow.
dinner at my house growing up, and I love cooking. It's like an art form for me. And so if somebody's coming to my house for dinner, it means I've started prepping the day before. I've gone shopping for the flowers. I've gone to the market to get all the fresh produce, and I've gone to the fish market to get the fish or whatever.
It's an
Um,
experience.
it's an
Yeah.
experience, and then
Yeah.
I'm spending from noon, I'm prepping for dinner starting at noon, right? So, and my friend's supposed to come over at 6 o'clock, and at 5 o'clock, I get a cancellation.
Oh, I've been there. Yeah. I've been
And I'm
there.
going like, and not for a good reason. It's not like I have COVID. It's like I'm not feeling it. It's not in the flow for me right now. Like, and I'm triggered.
I'm not in the flow.
It's not in the flow for me. And I'm looking at this and I'm sending photos of the 5-course gourmet meal that I'm making. And then I hear nothing after that. It's just radio silence on text. And this is a person that I don't know very well. So, I think especially
Well,
when
now
we're
you do.
starting, well, when we're starting new relationships, it's like
Yeah.
we teach people how to treat us. And so I got a sort of small, like a pseudo apology late at night after I ended up inviting other people over and we had dinner because I had lots of food. And I sort of ignored that because I was still triggered. And then this morning I thought about it and I thought, you know what? I don't know what if I'm going to be able to have a friendship with this person, but my initial inclination was to let her off the hook, right?
Right.
Oh, no big deal. I understand.
Be a
Oh,
good girl.
you're having right? Like that was sincerely because I don't know her very well and I like her. I have fond memories from when I knew her before. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to do the conflict avoidant thing and let her off the hook. I'm going to say, actually, you know what? That didn't feel good. I don't do very well with people who cancel at the last minute without even acknowledging the impact on me. It feels selfish. It feels yeah, like is this whole friendship going to revolve around you and your mercurial moods or like I show up. When I say I'm going to show up, I show up unless I have COVID, right? Unless I have somebody died, like some really important. That's kind of how I engage. And I don't really tend to stay friends with people who cancel at the last minute. And it was an opportunity to sort of find out who this person is. And
Yeah.
she wrote me the most beautiful response. Um, just an absolute ownership, complete remorse, like every effort to make repairs and amends and validated my feelings, and at the end of it now I feel closer to her than I did before the rupture. And so when I talk about conflict avoidance, it's like we're missing intimacy. We're missing the opportunity to find out who somebody is, to speak up about our boundaries, to express our needs and preferences and desires. And if we are usually the strategies that people use in order to be conflict avoidant also make us dishonest.
Yeah.
Like or two-faced, right? Because I see this a lot if you're trying to be conflict avoidant and people pleasing to two different people who have opposite needs, that means you're going to fawn this person and, chameleon yourself to say what you think they want you to hear. but then you're going to say the opposite to this other person. And it's going to feel like a betrayal to this person because who are you? Which one are you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about you talk about boundaries. I My mom said to me, "Debbie, you don't need boundaries." And I said, "What do you mean about?" No, you need truth because your truth sets the boundary. And
Mm,
that has always stuck with
wow.
me. And then you also bring up something, your philosophy. If I believe if we have one philosophy that we live by, then I can be real with this person and real with this person. And I don't have to be changing who I
Exactly.
am in front of people. But the idea of avoiding conflict, there's the social aspect of it, right? But then there's also the fallout from that. Be nice, don't hurt people's feelings, etc. What does that do to a human body that is attempting to form itself into this beautiful, strong, resilient being?
Well, we talked about the nervous system. I think it's extremely hard on the nervous system when we're not living in truth with ourselves or when we're suppressing our emotions, where I was triggered, I was angry, I was hurt. And if I then bury that in my body rather than releasing it through my expression, through my physicality, through my words, that's the topic of the book that Jeff and I are working on now. We're talking about the health implications of what happens when we suppress those emotions. We're specifically writing about oppressive relationships and oppressive systems like white supremacy or patriarchy, um, because in order to get along, in order to create any kind of harmony, quote air quotes, in oppressive situations, then we often have to practice conflict avoidance. Right? We're
Right.
actively trying not to activate the perpetrator, not to become a victim, not to become the target. And so conflict avoidance is a really important protector part, to use internal family systems language. Um, those parts that we develop to avoid conflict often saved our lives when we're children. If people are in abusive homes, then learning how to, adapt yourself to the unpredictability of a perpetrating person in the house, for example, is an incredibly life affirming strategy. It's just that when we get out of those dangerous situations, if we don't then change those adaptive strategies that we've developed to save our lives, to make sure we didn't get kicked out of the house, to get along for the first 18 years of our lives, then we have ongoing problems in our relationships, which create ongoing nervous system dysregulation, which creates premature illness. So Jeff and I are particularly interested as radical remission researchers, both of us, um, in the number of people who had unexpected cures from quote unquote incurable illnesses. And when we interviewed them to find out, like, what did you do? What was your strategy? One of the most common things that we heard is that people got out of abusive relationships
Yeah.
and started getting really clear with their boundaries. One of the women that Jeff interviewed called it the selfish bitch project. She was like, instead of making it all about everybody else and meeting everybody else's needs and caregiving everybody else and fawning and people pleasing and accommodating, she did the YOU turn, the U turn. Actually, I have cancer now. It gets to be about me and my needs and my preferences and my boundaries. And no, no, you cannot do that to me. And a number of the people that had these unexpected cures had, I called it becoming unfuckwithable. So the selfish bitch project, becoming unfuckwithable. And again, we don't want to become narcissistic ourselves as a reaction to a narcissistic abuse situation. It's not about centering ourselves. It's about, walking that razor's edge between speaking up and expressing our own needs and boundaries, and also being aware and attuned of other people's needs and boundaries, and living in a shared power kind of equal reciprocal dance with that.
You make me think of what it must have been like for you as a physician coming up against a conflict a lot. There's you and your belief, your values, your philosophy, etc. And yet there's also the need to protect your job and also the expectations that are placed on you by society, by a medical culture. What has that done to you and to that you turn?
I'm feeling tears as you say that, Debbie, because that's so sensitive. That's like such a sensitive point for me. Um,
Mm,
I left clinical medicine as an OBGYN in 2007 because of the moral injury. Um, the amount of pressure that I got, and I went to very high powered institutions. So I was at the cream of the crop, the top of the tier in academic medicine. And the pressure that I felt to not feel as a doctor, like feeling as a doctor was absolutely anathema. Like it is unprofessional. And I was an OBGYN. I wrote a book called The Anatomy of a Calling.
yeah.
And the first chapter in The Anatomy of a Calling is about what I called the night of 4 dead babies. I was a
Mm,
resident at Northwestern. And I had one night where I had to deliver 4 dead babies, like hand a dead baby to the mom. And I would crawl into the bed with the mom and I was sobbing. The moms were sobbing and I was having an empathic woman to woman response to this tragedy. And the night ended after the 4th dead baby. I couldn't handle it anymore. I went like running down the hallway in labor and delivery, and I went running into the doctor's lounge or the dressing room, the women's dressing room, the bathroom and the dressing room. And I went running in there to get away from my attending, who was a man, screaming at me, "Buck up, Rankin. You got to stop fucking feeling, buck up, Rankin." And I was like, "Get away from me." I went running into the locker room. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. And God bless them, these 2 midwives came running in after me. And I was just sobbing in the bathroom, like collapsed on the floor. See, I'm feeling it now. Ugh.
ugh,
And they held me in their arms and they rocked me, the 2 of them. They got on the floor and they held me in their lap and rocked me and said, one of them said, "Don't ever let them break you." And I left medicine because I could feel it happening. I could feel it happening. It's like, they're breaking me. They're breaking me. And I couldn't pay the price of my humanity, my femininity, my compassion, my empathy, my feelings, my body. My body was breaking down also. I was taking 7 medications by that point and I was 36 years old.
wow, wow.
Non-psych meds, like physical health medications. So,
So, have you played over in your mind when we think about trauma symptom and conflict avoidance? Let's rewind that tape. Um, how would but I've done this, that's why I'm asking.
yeah, yeah.
How would you now in your mind see yourself responding to that man who was trained, I'm sure, to just like you were, to not feel and probably thought he was doing the best thing for you,
Right,
telling you not to
right,
feel.
right.
How how would you how would that look now?
Well, now I would stand at that door with my hand out and say, "No, stop. No, go. Give me space. I'll be back in 15 minutes."
Yeah.
But there were so many times that I didn't say no in my medical training, which is why there's all that feeling in there. Like I was sexually harassed incessantly. Like I was physically assaulted, like pimped by, I don't know if people know the term pimping. It's like when the attending is asking the medical students and the residents really difficult questions. And if you get it wrong, then they attack you. And so I was getting pimped in the operating room and I got a question wrong. And this surgeon threw an HIV infected scalpel at me and cut me. And I had to go through the whole HIV protocol. And I think back to that and I think I should have called the police.
Yeah.
and had the guy arrested for assault. That is illegal. That is attempted murder.
Yeah.
That is like,
Wow.
seriously. And I didn't. So that's what I mean. Like, I sucked up to these people so that I could get an A. And the selling out of my own parts, the selling out of my own authenticity, of my own boundaries, of my own integrity. There has been, in my trauma healing journey, there has been hell to pay between me and the parts of me that I threw under the bus in order to get ahead in medicine. And a lot of that includes not speaking up when you're being taught things that you know are wrong. And Jeff, my partner, he spent 20 years studying radical remission, wrote a book called Cured about the findings of that very rigorous radical remission research and his findings of what these people had in common. And he has been medical director at Harvard's inpatient psych hospital, McLean Southeast, for 22 years at that point. And his boss came to him after that book came out and accused him of, quote unquote, going rogue. You went rogue. As if speaking about what actually cures is an affront to Harvard,
Wow.
a ruin of the reputation of McLean. And that pressure that I felt, like I felt that pressure, which is part of why I left academia. I didn't stay in the high-powered academic institutions that I was trained in because I realized how bad it was. Like, clinical medicine in a community hospital was much safer and much more compassionate than academia. The most narcissistic of the most narcissistic stay in academia. And the kind people leave because it's a Shark Tank. So being able to speak up, to write Mind Over Medicine, which my dad was a doctor and he was one of those very conventional doctors. He died. That was part of why I left clinical medicine. I left a year after my father died.
Yeah.
And I don't think I would have been able to write Mind Over Medicine if my father had still been alive, because the conflict avoidant part of me, the part that wanted to please my father or, toe the party line of academic medicine, just would have found it too difficult to write what I wrote in Mind Over Medicine, which was very edgy for me to actually. I was incredibly terrified to publish that book, like terrified of losing favor with, my colleagues. And I did lose favor with some of my colleagues, and I was venerated for it by some of the others. So I've now been 11 years training doctors in the Whole Health Medicine Institute in, the principles of what's in that book and introducing them to people who are doing healing work in other arenas, basically everything we didn't learn in medical school. Um, yeah, so it was really quite a journey for me to go through the trauma healing process of tempering my nervous system. You were an amazing early intervention in my post medical recovery. I did the NIA white belt training in 2009 or
Yeah. A
2010,
long time ago.
long time ago. And I remember you giving us an instruction like, feel your elbow in space and see if you can put words to the state of your elbow. And I realized I could not locate my elbow. Like, in order to tolerate becoming a doctor and enduring all that conflict avoidance, all that abuse, keeping my mouth shut, stuffing it all, I had to leave my body. I was frequently dissociating. I was in the vicinity of my body, like watching my body walk around from the outside. And so I realized I had to do almost my whole white belt on the floor because I could feel my elbow on the floor, but I had literally lost proprioception. And so to come back into my body also meant that I was extremely uncomfortable, the anxiety that I would feel
Yeah.
in my nervous system when I thought about standing up to a corrupt system, because the reality is that, the conventional medical system saves lives. It has increased the life expectancy of humans by 30 years in the past 100 years. So, like, I'm a fan. And it gives, at least in the US, it gives lip service to patient well-being while ultimately being at the mercy of the financial bottom line. That is reality.
Yeah.
And if you cooperate with a corrupt system, then you are an accomplice to that corruption. And my nervous system could not reconcile. This is the moral injury. I knew, I knew that I knew what patients needed in order to heal, and it was impossible to deliver that. I mean, when I started my OBGYN practice, I was expected to see 25 patients a day. By the time I
Oh,
quit, I was expected to see 40. That means I was double booked in 15-minute slots. It's not like they added, 4 hours to my schedule. It was just taking time away, just churning more and more people through because our reimbursements were going down. The cost of rent in San Diego was going up. The cost of employee overhead was going up. Our expenses were going up. Our reimbursements were going down. We had to just churn through patients. And this is gynecology. This is obstetrics. This is women's issues, women's health. These women needed me. They needed
yeah.
time. They needed I couldn't do it, and I couldn't handle letting my patients down, letting myself down, selling out for a paycheck. So,
Well, that's that the edge of leadership, self-care, leadership, and then healthcare. And in terms oh, here comes your cutie pie. Who's that?
this this is Gaia, but she's not really an earth goddess like we thought, so we call her the moose.
I love it. I love pets.
She's a bit more
Um,
of a beast.
you know, as someone that sits in a role of leadership, where people have expectations, of me, the the criticism that comes that one has to hold space for at times for me has been intolerable.
Oh, yeah.
And particularly with things like social media or a horrific podcast that came out that was getting everybody who was disgruntled with Nia to come on and talk. And I felt responsible in a sense to not speak up, to be nice. And the message was, you know, people need to have the freedom of speech, the freedom of voice. And yet the what I felt as just a woman, as a human being, the attack at times still when it's, I'll get diarrhea when I think about it. Um and taking care of yourself at same time working with you had to work with a medical institution. I've got to work with a company that I created that I never intended to put myself in this place of having to quote be in business.
Right.
um what have you learned about yourself from that makes you feel like I'm on the right path now?
Yeah, one of the things that I became aware of during the pandemic, was that well, before the pandemic, really, I was really paying attention to other online influencers to see if they took a stand for maybe things like politically, polarizing issues. Because I realized for my integrity, if I have 100,000 people on my email list or on my Facebook page or on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, if I'm not taking a stand for social justice, for example, then I am taking a stand for the oppressor. Like my silence is violence in the social justice world. And I was watching some of the other women that I admired, and I was absolutely gobsmacked at how silent they were around things like Black Lives Matter during, when Black Lives Matter was first coming up. Um, and so I made it a point as an influencer to take a very firm stand when there was something that was part of my value system, my integrity. And man, people were vicious. Like,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, spiritual white women, they are some of the most vicious people when it comes to talking about white supremacy. Like,
Yeah.
wow, people. Um, so I didn't hold back during the pandemic, and I was absolutely shocked at some of the physicians that I had admired and respected, people like Christiane Northrup, who wrote the foreword to my first book. And then all of a sudden, you have these doctors that are saying there is no COVID denialism,
Right.
anti-vax rhetoric. It was just like, don't wear a mask. Like it was crazy talk. Um,
Yeah.
and Trump is a light worker, and I'm like, what is happening to the people in the wellness world and the alternative health community and the spiritual circles that I had been a part of, that I thought I belonged to? And I realized, like, oh wow, I don't belong to that world if that's where that world is going. And so I just became ruthless with my honesty and ruthless with my boundaries, and people were trying to use my social media platforms to promote misinformation. And I was speaking. One of my closest friends was a frontline COVID doctor working in the ICUs, who also he's an infectious disease specialist who worked at the CDC. He's an incredible, brilliant mind and an empathic, beautiful human. I met him through Rachel Naomi Remen. I've been part of a
Yeah.
circle of spiritual doctors that Rachel has been our leader for many, many years. And I was getting my information direct from him. Like, this was science. And it was absolutely flying in the face of everything these mind body medicine alternative kind of doctors were talking about. So we just started banning and deleting anybody who used my platform to promote misinformation. And I lost a huge part of my audience, but then I actually got a whole influx of very different people who were like, oh, this is a doctor who's
Yeah.
willing to stand up to bullies, who's
Yeah.
willing to speak truth about misinformation, and is willing to set boundaries to protect the online community from just viciousness. So I got a much more diverse community, a lot more BIPOC, a lot more people who saw that I was taking an active stand for Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement and other social justice causes. So I learned that about myself. But again, it was very activating to my nervous system. Like, literally every day I would get hate mail and death threats. And even still, I just sent out an email to my newsletter list endorsing Kamala Harris, and my assistant, who's relatively new at this job, she just was like absolutely traumatized by the viciousness of the people who wrote to me to express their disappointment in me.
No, I'm there with you. I get it every day. And then, there's also the aspect of I so wish it was just me as a practitioner of this work. But now it's become this global work. So I might talk about something that's important in the United States, and it is it commented on, right, from so many different perspectives where it has no meaning or purpose in people's lives. So to again to stay true to truth, to the authentic self, and just listening to you, I feel ashamed and bad that I did not confront that podcast immediately head on. And yeah, and even with communication experts telling me, don't say anything, don't say anything. And I hear that and I think, gosh, they know, right? But yet there's that gut sensation of like, this isn't right. And certainly in my heart, this isn't right. You can want to share your experience about something, but to want to consciously damage somebody, or as you said, consciously send a hurtful message. Does the butterfly flap its wings and do we all feel it? Absolutely. And until we begin to understand our interconnectedness and how we affect each other, and we got a lot of cleaning up to do to be uh, conscious, what we call conscious human beings, kind and considerate human beings that allow, when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, diverse, you want to vote for this person, you want to vote, fantastic. Fantastic. Walk your talk, right? But where is that? Where's that space, that spiritual space that you say, that you've been attacked? And people can hide behind that, be kind, be nice, turn the other cheek
Yeah.
kind of thing. And then, um, in a sense, watch somebody get um, torn apart.
Well, I'm really sorry about that podcast happened. I'm not aware of what that podcast was, but I can imagine what that might be like. And I think it's such a fine balance. So I'm just personally woman to woman, friend to friend. I'm sorry that you got attacked publicly. Um, I get attacked publicly also. And the way I deal with it is I try to make myself very available for feedback with my community. And I try to navigate that publicly. Like it happens in my Facebook feed where people are criticizing me. And I try to take it in of like, does this person have a legitimate
Right.
bit of feedback that I, as a leader, have a responsibility to listen to the feedback and own what I might be doing wrong. And I do, I make a lot of mistakes. And I think my community has developed a certain amount of trust in me that it's
Mhm.
okay to challenge the leader. It's okay to say that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's how we cult proof our communities. Like we have to be, as leaders, we have to be challengeable or we're a cult leader. Like
Exactly.
that's what cult leaders do. Like you can't challenge the leader. And we also have a right to protect ourselves from just outright abuse and attacks. So it's okay to have boundaries around what kind of feedback is okay. Like I learned from Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, that what's really helpful is if people can speak on behalf of their parts rather than blending with parts. So what that means, what that looks like is instead of screaming at you and telling you you're a horrible motherfucker, Debbie Rosas, it's I have a part that is triggered by what you just said because it reminds me of my mother. And my mother was this strong, powerful woman who would abuse her power to control me. And then I can give you feedback that I'm having a reaction, I'm having an emotion, or I'm having a sensation because of what you just said, but I'm not putting the entire responsibility of all of that onto you. I'm owning that it's related to me and my mother trauma.
Exactly. That's high consciousness, and
Mm.
it's it's a good thing. Um, do you do you feel that? Well, let me ask you this: what's the true nature and value of learning to not avoid?
Intimacy, I would
Okay.
say, is the prize. Intimacy is the prize. Like conflict avoidance is a type of intimacy avoidance. It's commonly employed by people with attachment wounding,
Mhm.
with maybe the avoidant attachment style or the disorganized attachment style or the anxious attachment style. When we can temper our nervous systems, and I'm using that language from Resma Menachem, whose work I love. For those of you that don't know Resma, he is a somatic experiencing trauma therapist, BIPOC civil rights activist who wrote the best book about Black Lives Matter called My Grandmother's Hands. It's very
Oh,
it's very
beautiful.
compassionate.
Yeah, beautiful.
It's very compassionate. He also wrote a wonderful book about romantic relationships called Monsters in Love. And he basically teaches somatic practices to temper the nervous system. He also wrote a wonderful book called The Quaking of America. And it's the same message. He says, in order to combat what he calls white body supremacy, in order to be in integrity in our romantic relationships, we have to be able to temper the nervous system to handle conflict.
Yeah.
I need to be able to stand up against these vicious spiritual white women who have been so awful to me. Um, in order to tolerate the feeling of being attacked and to not back down, to still stand in my integrity, to still stand for anti-racism, for example, or to stand up to my partner who is 6'4" and scary. He looks like a cop. Um, he's bald, 6'4" giant. And so when he gets angry, it's scary. It's scary for me to stand up to him and not collapse and fawn and accommodate and people please and try to make him happy so that he doesn't hurt me, you know? And he's never laid a hand on me in any kind of violence, but I've had men hold guns to my head. I've been a domestic violence survivor.
Wow.
So it's scary to stand up to someone big and angry. And my nervous system goes, right?
Yeah.
But we can use these somatic practices to help the nervous system tolerate. So we're not so fragile. So we're not so, because fawning, they say fight, flight, freeze, and fawn
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. I call a
from
flop. Yeah, the
yeah,
fawn.
from Pete Walker's book, Complex PTSD. He has a wonderful section about fawning. And that's really what Jeff and I are writing about in this next book is the fawn response is the most severe stress response. They're all stress responses. Fight and flight is the sympathetic nervous system. Freeze and fawn is more the dorsal vagal parasympathetic, the drop, the collapse. Um, and so to be able to move up the polyvagal ladder, for those of you that know polyvagal theory, they say to get from dorsal vagal, which is the most frozen, collapsed, dissociated, to get up, it's actually a step up to get to the sympathetic nervous system. So fighting is better than freezing and fawning. Fleeing is better than freezing and fawning. But to get to the ventral vagal, the tend and befriend, the social, securely attached, self-healing version of the nervous system requires training the nervous system to be able to tolerate conflict
Yeah.
so that we can be in integrity and not have our nervous system all jangled up because we're not being authentic. We're not speaking truth, as your mother said, having the truth boundaries. So when we can increase our tolerance, and the more privilege one has, the less tolerance one has for the most part. So the higher on the privilege chain we are, the lower our tolerance for conflict. The people who have the most marginalizations have had to learn
Right.
to deal with
Good
conflict their
train. They're
entire
trained.
lives.
Yeah.
Their entire lives. They're like, I roll, right? Like, okay, already. And those of us, I have every privilege except being male. I'm not male. I have every other privilege. So I had to go through a lot of nervous system tempering to be able to tolerate all of the conflict that comes from being a leader in this time and space
Yeah.
on the internet in this polarized world right now. To be able to stand for the things that I care about and wield my power with ethics and social justice and yeah, to live in alignment with my values. But it's still hard for me.
this is such a good time to learn a new posture,
Mhm.
to learn a new walk, to learn a new voice, and those are things that, in my brown belt training we teach to measure your posture, your walk, and voice. They energetically tell you a lot about what's going on. And I was lucky. I grew up in a household where yelling was the way that we got into great conversation. So dinner time at the table was always this boisterous, loud. And I'd invite friends over to come and have dinner, and they would be like in freeze at the dinner table, going, "What is going on here? My God, your family fights so much." I said, "No, we're not fighting. This is how we have lofty conversation." And we
What's your ethnic
laugh and
background?
but
What's your ethnic background?
everybody raised their voice. So I'm not bothered by somebody raising voice. Now I've married somebody that came from a complete different household that completely freezes. And so even my voice, I've
Yeah,
had to learn how to temper my voice so that that person can lean in, that person can hear. Does it drive me crazy? Absolutely. But it's a reality,
that's
that
right.
how can we create that communication, as you say, with ourselves, first of all,
Well, and that's
being
why I said
true.
conflict avoidance is a trauma symptom, right? So we need to be sensitive to the people for whom conflict was dangerous.
Right.
Conflict was terror. Um, and so it's, we can't just walk around, you know, fully self-expressed without um, sensitivity and awareness and compassion and empathy for the impact of what we're saying and doing, how we're posturing ourselves, how we're using our voice, how we're wielding our power on other people. So that's why I said it's a razor's edge, right? It's not just, oh, I'm an empowered woman, so I'm entitled to just be uncontained and fill a room with my voice or my message or whatever. Like, no, it's also my responsibility to contain myself, to respect the boundaries of other people, to respect the sensitivities of other people. And that's the razor's edge, right? It's like the U-turn, but also be aware of one's impact. We only have a right to take up a certain amount of space, right? And so that's part of my work in my own healing is like I can take up too much space. So to be contained so that I'm sensitive to the impact on other people.
Yeah, because we
And
share space.
that's right.
It's a shared space. Do you think that social media has become their safe outlet?
I do, because again, conflict avoidance never goes well in the end. Conflict avoidance always results in resentment. And resentment, when I feel resentment, resentment's on me. Resentment means I have overstepped my own boundaries. I haven't said no when I should have. I haven't called someone out or spoken up. I haven't held my own boundaries. So I think people who carry that much resentment, they need an outlet, and it's going to come out sideways, usually as passive aggression.
Yeah.
Right. So in their personal relationships, it's usually going to be this passive aggressive punishing energy. And the person that they're putting it on might have no idea what they've done to upset someone
Right.
because they haven't spoken up. So it's just like, wow, okay, why are you acting out sideways? But if you go to the internet and you can be anonymous, you can just be aggressive,
Yeah.
and there's no accountability.
Yeah.
So I do think that,
The
anonymous,
accountability, for our emotional integrity, um, and as you say, it's hard sometimes to have integrity when we're in conflict avoidance, and we somehow just can't find the courage to acknowledge
right?
our true feelings, to be 100% honest, first just with ourselves.
Yeah.
Gosh, that hurt me that, you know, an hour before dinner you call, right? To just acknowledge that.
Absolutely. And that's why, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the word accountability because that personal accountability, but if we're conflict avoidant, we're not holding others to account.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and we're not really holding ourselves to account. So that accountability piece is really important, but accountability with integrity, right? Because, yeah, I mean, I just wrote a blog post about this and I started it with a story from my childhood because I realized from the indoctrination of my fundamentalist Christian mother that part of what I thought morality was, like my moral compass was aimed at never disappointing anyone, especially my mother.
Uh-huh.
And so then you wind up in these leadership roles where, like, wow, everybody wants something from me. Like, my assistant goes through the inbox every day, and I joke that I've had to become a professional disappointer, and I still can't handle disappointing everybody, so my assistant has to be the professional disappointer on my behalf because I'm such a sucker. I would overschedule myself with things I'm not getting paid for
Yeah.
in order to accommodate and please these really lovely people who send me these long emails that want something from me.
Yeah.
I hate that feeling of letting people down. It's still a very difficult feeling for me to disappoint other people. But if I'm in that disappointment avoidance, then that is usually a conflict avoidance stand. And I'm selling out my own parts. I'm selling out my own needs. I'm selling out my health. I'm selling out my relationships. I'm selling out my financial security in order to appease and please other people. So I'm not saying we shouldn't be pleasing and accommodating and caring and compassionate and generous and giving. Like, I value myself for all of those qualities. But we have to know where our limits are in order to not overextend and overfunction, and overgive. We started the book, Jeff and I started the book that we're writing with the story of the giving trees, Shel Silverstein's The Giving Tree. I was raised on that book. And for those who don't know it, it's basically a tree and a boy, and the boy comes and he's climbing her branches and eating her apples, and she loves this boy. And then he gets a little older and he doesn't want to climb on her branches anymore, but he wants money. And she's like, I don't have money, but you can take my apples and sell them at the market. And then he ignores her for many years and he comes back and she's like, climb on my branches, like, climb, play with me, spend time with me, give me attention. And he's like, no, I want a house. I want to have a wife and children. I want a house. And she's like, well, I can't give you a house, but you can cut down my branches and use them to build a house. And so he goes and he does that. And then he ignores her for another decade or two. And anyway, it ends with, he just wants a boat to like sail away. And so she's like, well, you can take my trunk. And so she ends up just a dead stump. And then he's an old man and he comes and, she's like, I have nothing left to give you. I have nothing left to give you. I love you unconditionally, but I have nothing left to give you. And he's like, that's okay. I'm an old man. I can just sit on the stump. But I was raised to think that that's a spiritual woman, somebody who gives and gives and gives to the point of martyrdom, to the point of self destruction and death. But really, that story that so many children were indoctrinated on is a story of abuse. Like, this is the story of narcissism. This is the story of the taker and the giver. And there's no reciprocity in that relationship. And that makes people sick prematurely. This causes cancer. Um, this causes autoimmune disease. This causes chronic pain syndromes. Our bodies and our nervous systems cannot handle that level of lack of reciprocity. So, in order to insist on reciprocity in relationships, we have to not be conflict avoidant. If we're conflict avoidant, we're likely to tolerate lack of reciprocity. And if somebody else that we're in relationship with is conflict avoidant, we might be the taker, right? We need somebody else to hold us to account in reciprocity. And like, that is the core of everything my work is about. Like, that is everything to me. I was a civil rights activist at 7. Like, my sister's BIPOC. So I was early in my journey of caring about equality, caring about social justice. And if we can't demand equality in relationships, in one-on-one relationships, how can we possibly have it at a systemic level to combat white supremacy and patriarchy and all of, homophobia and all of these other injustices in the world?
You know, that's the matrix that we hope can be created for a business, for an individual, for a culture, for a society. That sharing of responsibility and the coherent management of what comes in and what goes out, and creating that balance. That is a kind of integrity and spiritual and social healing that I think the universe is asking us to basically wake up to it. The earth is certainly asking us to wake up to it. And, I think most every kind of business is being asked to wake up to it. Does anybody have the correct model for it? Well, I think certainly a model that is based on the design and function of the human body is a really good model. And this is what you're talking about. You're talking about, let's go in and sustain the structure, but let's also be aware of the voices that are coming so that we can be self responsible and that we can also be responsible outside of self for a greater whole, which is a lovely, lovely vision. What reaction sensations do you think that we can learn to sense, to observe, that lets us know we're avoiding conflict?
Hmm. I tell people, I tell my students, um, all you have to do in the beginning is be able to identify trigger, activation. I'm activated.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to know why instantly, right? Just notice, which requires embodiment. You have to be in your body to be able to feel when your fight or flight sympathetic nervous system is getting kicked off, or when your freeze or fawn dorsal vagal collapse shutdown is getting turned on. Um, if we can feel that, that's called interoception.
Yeah.
Interoception is the ability to sense and acknowledge the state of the nervous system. Am I dorsal vagal? Am I sympathetic? Am I ventral vagal? Can I sense that? And if I can tell that I'm in a sympathetic or dorsal vagal response when I shouldn't be, right? Like, then I'm aware I'm having a trigger. So I'll give you an example. My partner and I, this was a couple years ago, we went out to a restaurant. We were trying to save money and it was a really expensive restaurant. So we sat at the bar and we were just going to order a couple appetizers and split them. And as I said, my partner is a 6'4" monster and he has the metabolism of a 16-year-old boy. So we sit down and we've ordered a salad and like a shrimp appetizer and we're supposed to, share them.
Of course.
And I look over and they're gone. They're gone. And I have a trigger, like I'm activated. And I could feel like tears coming up, but we're in the middle of a crowded bar. And so I was able to say to my partner, I'm going to excuse myself to the toilet. I'll be right back. So I could go to the bathroom and sit on the toilet and cry and be like, who's inside? Who's upset? Which part has just taken me over?
Yeah.
And to create a little bit of distance to be with that part rather than overtaken by that part. And then I can sit there. We can almost always excuse ourselves to the toilet, unless we're in the middle of doing a podcast interview, or
I'll
operating.
still excuse you.
We can almost always just take that amount of a pause rather than attacking my partner or melting down in public or whatever other option I might have had. I was able to go in and recognize, oh, there's a part of me that had to overfunction, over caretake, take care of everybody else. And even as a child, like I had to be the parentified child, taking care of my mother and my siblings. Nobody was really taking care of me adequately. And when somebody else does something insensitive and um, offers to do something caregiving, he was buying the food and then doesn't deliver. It's very sensitive in me. It's like a bait and switch. It's like, let me show care for you. Psych, never mind. I'm going to think about myself. And so then I was able to come back to my partner. This is the opposite of conflict avoidance, right?
Right.
If I was conflict avoidant, I would have gone into the toilet, cried, and then maybe bitched to my best friend the next day. But I was able to come back and say, when you ate all of the food and weren't sensitive to my needs and weren't attuned to my hunger, it activated this young part that had to take care of everybody else. And of course he was like, "Oh my God, I'll buy you more food." Like it wasn't about the food. It was about the insensitivity to the sharing. And so I was able to say, okay, going forward, maybe we just order separate appetizers or we split them and put them on different plates. And that's the boundary. That's the request.
Right.
And then I'm in integrity and then we've repaired and he's never done that again. Right. But if I hadn't spoken up, then there might not have been a sensitivity to my sensitive part that likes to be taken care of sometimes because I spend so much time taking care of everybody else.
What is you talk about a certain technique, internal family systems. What is that?
Great question. There's so much information, including I did a YouTube video called The Basics of Internal Family Systems. So
Okay.
it's like an hour and a half long. It's a long answer, but the short answer, and I'll give you the link, Debbie. So if you want to
Awesome.
put it in the
That's
show notes.
fantastic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So In short, it was developed by Dick Schwartz. He wrote a great book called No Bad Parts. He's written a bunch of books, but that's
Mhm.
the latest one. And it's based on the idea that all of us are a multiplicity of parts. That the idea of the unified self is a myth. That not all of us are not everybody has their parts so blown apart that they have full dissociative identity disorder, or what we used to call multiple personality disorder. But we basically all have a bunch of little personalities running inside.
Exactly.
And we know that. Like, anybody who thinks they don't, I say, think back to the time you had one part that's like a self improvement part that made a New Year's resolution. And then you had another part that broke the New Year's resolution. And then you had a part that comes in and starts shaming you for being so undisciplined. Right there you go. You've got three parts right there. And we tend to have what we call protector parts and exiles, or the exiles are like our wounded inner children. And the protector parts are sort of our adaptive strategies, the ways that we learned to cope because of the wounded children, because these protectors are trying to make sure we don't get flooded and overwhelmed with the feelings of those wounded inner children. So they are trying to shut down the flames of emotion. And we have multiple strategies. We have the manager parts that are proactive. They're trying to prevent flares of emotion. And then we have the reactive. When those emotions come up, then we go and do whatever we can to tamp down those feelings, whether it's going on a drinking binge or eating an entire thing of ice cream, or all of our different addictions. Most of the reactive, I call them the firefighters in IFS. We demonize, we medicate them, we hospitalize them, we put them in prison. We don't like them in ourselves. We try to hide them from other people. We don't like them in other people. But even those parts are, they're trying to protect us. They're trying to keep us from getting overwhelmed by the feelings of our unhealed, wounded inner children. So the work of IFS is to befriend and become intimate with our protector parts, the adaptive strategies, to have a compassionate lens, from the part that's not a part, which in IFS we call self. Every religion has a name for it: Christ consciousness, or Buddha nature, Atman. Um, it's a relationship between the self and the part. It's an intimate relationship that is acknowledging the value of these protectors and why they do what they do, even if they're harming us, even if they're harmful to other people. To have a compassionate lens so that we can have enough shame resilience to acknowledge and be in integrity and develop relationships with those parts, so that we can ethically go to the wounded inner children with the permission of our protectors. A lot of like large group awareness trainings and stuff will take people to their exiled parts without protector permission, and then you get all kinds of backlash. People will suicide after these events. They'll have psychotic episodes. They'll have medical conditions. So you don't want to just blaze right to those parts. You want to gently get to know the parts that protect them first. So it's a beautiful system.
Are those protector parts the parts of someone that causes them to turn to alcohol and drugs? Is that a form of protection for people?
Absolutely. So that
Yeah.
would be the firefighter. That would be like the reactive, all of our addictions, whether it's workaholism, or they're all different strategies for not feeling. Um, any like sex addiction, whatever, any addiction, but also other reactive firefighters are basically everything in the DSM-5: psychotic parts, suicidal parts, disordered eating parts, raging parts, perpetrator parts, parts that um, sexually abuse people, parts that are violent with our children, or whatever. Those are all reactive protectors. Um, they're protecting us from feeling the feelings. So I watched an incredible IFS demo with a teenage boy who had murdered two other teenage boys. And the district attorney had been trained in IFS, and he had been mute since the arrest. And she went to him and said, I know you have a part that's muting you right now. And I know you have a part that murdered people, but that's not all of you. Those are just parts. And I'd like to get to know the rest of you.
Mm.
And she did this interview with him in front of the parents of the murdered boys and the whole village. It was in a small village in China. The whole village had this like massive healing around the traumatized, wounded inner child of the boy, the murderer.
Mhm.
But just even creating that space, you're not a murderer, you have a murderer part. And to get to know the part that had been overpowered and needed this rush of power to create this act of violence. So
Wouldn't
it's
this
like how
be wouldn't it be wonderful if this was required education in school?
I absolutely think it should be, and there are
It should
people
be.
that are I'm working on bringing IFS into medicine,
Mhm.
but there are people that are actively working to try to bring IFS into, early childhood education. I taught my daughter IFS when she was 7, and she's in IFS therapy as an 18-year-old, but it's been wonderful that she could speak on behalf of her parts as a child, and it created a lot more integrity in her system. You know, she feels safe to speak on behalf of parts with her with her family.
So what last message do you want to leave everybody with? I know that you're in the process of writing this book. There are lots of ways people can engage. What's that message? And let that message also be a request of having people help you.
Thank you. Well, um, I mean, my big thing going forward, I'm 55 now, so I'm in that phase of my life where I'm thinking about legacy, right? I'm thinking about what am I going to leave behind?
Mhm.
Um, what contribution can I make? Because I've basically accomplished every egoic goal on my bucket list. Like, I don't really feel the need to prove anything anymore. I'm in this place where I'm really just thinking about health equity. And I don't want things like trauma healing or spiritual healing to be a luxury good. I'm
Mhm.
very aware. I'm about to go on an international trip where I'm going to be doing my work in England and the Maldives and Malta and Santorini, and, like, what a luxury good, right? People are coming to Malta to do an internal family systems and memoir writing class with me, like, that is a luxury good. I don't want all of my work to be a luxury good. I mean, most of what I do for free. Most of what I do, I write, and I'm all over the internet with my writing and my offerings, and we scholarship people to my online programs if they ask, but I want more than that, and so we have our first 2 grants for a nonprofit called Heal At Last, which is really about scaling, internal family systems and other trauma healing and trauma supportive measures, to create it's sort of basing it off of the 12-step model, like addiction is one trauma symptom, conflict avoidance is another trauma symptom. You might not identify with being an addict, if you're conflict avoidant, that might be a different trauma symptom. And chronic illness is another trauma symptom. So, because I'm a doctor, I'm very interested in bringing trauma healing and spiritual healing and trauma supportive practices like art therapy and movement practice and chanting and singing to populations who the way that their trauma has manifested itself is through the body and through somatic medical conditions or mental health issues. Um, and we're in the pilot stage now, working with IFS and cross trained therapists to develop this group delivery model that we hope will be by donation only, as widespread and as available in your local church or community center or somebody's living room as a 12-step meeting would be. So
Beautiful.
people can donate to that. We are a 501(c)(3) tax exempt company. And so we need funding. People can certainly help with that or get on the mailing list if you're interested in being part of the pilot or if you're interested in being a group leader. Um, people can send that's healatlast.org. And my main website is lissarankin.com. Um, Yeah, and we're gonna be enrolling for the Whole Health Medicine Institute in 2025, so we'll be opening enrollment in late September, for the January 2025 class, which is a 9-month program. Um, yeah, so people can follow me on Facebook or on Substack.
I'm very excited to see the next page.
Yeah.
I think each page in your life is a whole chapter, uh, but each page.
Yeah.
And I just can't thank you enough for this informative and really important conversation. Living in a world right now, in a time where uh, we are surrounded by conflict, how do we stay right in a healthy environment in this body, which everything that happens is perceived through this beautiful form? How do we stay attentive to a nervous system that is communicating wisdom and intelligence to us all the time? How do we honor the truth of our feelings, past, present, so that we can step into a future together, sharing space in healthier and more meaningful ways? Um, I'm going to leave you with this. When you feel that trigger, we can use our eyes to shift what's in front of us by just expanding our peripheral vision and to know that there's more than what is just in front of us. We can learn to recognize in the moment our need to stop and our need to sense through our hands, through our gut, through our feet, through our face, through our jaw, the need to stop and ask for space to slow down. We can all learn to close our eyes at first and take in 3 deep breaths, and then eventually keep our eyes open and smile just for a moment to break the field, to allow ourselves to stay present. We can learn to physically be aware of the energy fields around us. And as Lissa said, this interoception felt sense, what's going on inside of me. And we can learn to ground in this field where the speed of energy right now, the way the universe is expanding and contracting at such an accelerated rate, we can feel more grounded by tapping into something called the hara. Inside the pelvis, in the center, there's this beautiful point that's located about 2 inches below your navel. Tapping that point is what you see martial artists do. Tip of the tongue, up at the roof of your mouth, and exhale, and imagine from that point, 360 degrees around your body, these energy tentacles that allow you to float in space, to move in space, and be grounded and be centered. We can all learn to tap into what I call raw. The moment you feel the resistance and the conflict, to become raw. I'm going to relax my body and use your name to trigger that beautiful system in our brain that loves to kind of push away information that's not important. The reticular activation system. Say your name, Debbie, relax your body. Debbie, just become aware. Debbie, neutralize your emotions. Debbie, just wait for a moment and sense what is the right thing to do. We can honor our emotional being and out of self care operate from meaning. And this is the truth. What is important and meaningful to you right now? Don't be afraid to stand for it. Don't be afraid to say it. And if you need to get support to say it, call those people who can lift you up. Because unfortunately, we know there will be that wants to push us down. So we need as much support as we can to raise us up. I am one of those people. I know Lissa is one of those people. To find out more about Lissa, remember, go to lissarankin.com and lissarankinmd.substack.com. Is that correct? Beautiful,
Yes.
beautiful.
And it's 2 S's, Lissa Rankin.
Lissa, correct. Thank you very much. Find out more about me. You can go to my online magazine, debbierosas.com. Free articles. All you need to do is sign up for them every single week. They're inspiring and motivating to keep you in your body, to keep you saying no, and to keep you saying yes when it's most important. You can also find me on Facebook by searching Nia, and on Twitter, Instagram at Nia Technique, and on nianow.com. And if you want to experience what it means to sense this healing force of life force moving through your body, go to niaondemand.com. 2 weeks free for anybody. You can sign up and experience all kinds of movement meditations. And remember, this is the time for us to get into the conversation. Bring your voice, bring your ideas. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much, Lissa. And I look
It's such a
forward
pleasure.
to next time. Thanks, everybody.